Hey, what's up, everybody? True Boxing here. Thank you for coming back to Get Hit with the Truth. So today we are doing the IBF Champions Report, as this is the 6th edition of the Champions Report of 2024, and we're going to do a year in review. Look back at 2024 for all IBF titles from 122 all the way to heavyweight and champions, and we make a quick preview of what we can expect in 2025. So now, before we get into that, if you could smash the like button, leave a comment, or subscribe to the channel, I really do appreciate any and all support that I can get as I continue to build my channel here. So we start off with the 122-pound super bantamweight division. Naoya Inoue, the monster, entered the year as the newly crowned IBF and undisputed heavyweight super bantamweight champ after he had dethroned Martin Tapalis to unify all four belts in December of 23. He was keen to take over 122 completely by fighting his mandatory. So in May, he took on his WBC mandatory challenger and former two-division world champion, Luis Neri. History was made in the first round when Neri knocked Inoue down for the first time in his career. But Inoue got up, broke down Neri, and destroyed him, knocked him out in the 6th round to retain his IBF and undisputed title. Then in September, he kind of took a meaningless optional defense when he took on former IBF champion TJ Doheny of Ireland, dominated him, kind of lackluster performance, scored a 7th round TKO there to hold on to all four belts. He was supposed to fight his IBF and WBO mandatory challenger, undefeated Sam Goodman, on December 24th, but Goodman had to pull out with an injury. The fight was pushed back exactly a month, and now, as we enter 2025, Inoue and Goodman is going to take place on Friday, January 24th on ESPN. So 2025, as I said, Goodman is his IBF and WBO mandatory challenger, so he is going to absolve that if he's victorious. I really only see Inoue losing the IBF title this year is if he vacates the belt. So, but I don't think that's even, as long as he stays at 122, I don't think he's going to vacate because he doesn't have any pressure from the IBF for making a mandatory because Sam Goodman is his mandatory. So we'll see what happens in 2025, and we'll see on our first edition of the Champions Report at the end of February if there's an idea of who he might fight in his second fight in 2025. But again, he's got to get through Sam Goodman on January 24th. Next, at 126 featherweight, we had Luis Alberto Lopez entered the year as the reigning IBF champion. He had went coast to coast in 2023, was trying to do so in 2024. In March, he made a mandatory defense of his title against Raya Abe and scored a dominating 8th round TKO victory to keep his belt intact. Then in August, he would make an optional defense against former 122-pound champ Angelo Leo. And in a surprising turn of events, Leo was able to break down, bust up, and score a brutal 10th round upset knockout victory. This is a contender for upset of the year and knockout of the year as he captured the IBF title, becoming a two-division world champion. Now, we didn't hear anything the remainder of the year out of the Angelo Leo camp and what he's going to do. We do know that we actually don't know if he is in mandatory mode or not, because he was the optional defense, but because his mandatory title defense, or because the mandatory title defense was done the previous fight by Lopez against Raya Abe, is the IBF going to allow him to make an optional defense his first fight out, or are they going to order him to fight his number one contender, Tomoki Kameda? I'm waiting around to see what happens. Hopefully by the first edition of the Champions Report at the end of February in 2025, we'll know what he's doing heading into the year. I really hope he attempts to unify belts this year, but we'll see. Next, at 130, super featherweight, undefeated Joe Cordina entered the year as the reigning champion. And in May, he was making an optional defense before a mandatory was due when he took on little-known Anthony Kakachi. This was on the huge Reign of Fire Fury Usyk 1 pay-per-view undercard. And in a surprising turn of events, Anthony Kakachi scored a monster upset after a late punch in the 2nd or 3rd round. It was after the bell, really hurt Joe Cordina badly. and then he was really groggy the rest of the fight before Kakachi finally finished him off with an 8th round TKO victory and became the new champion. In September, on the big Riyadh season card from the UK, Kakachi looked like he was going to be making an optional defense against former 2-time featherweight champ Josh Warrington. The week of the fight, the IBF denied Warrington the right to fight for their title, so they allowed Kakachi to go forward with the fight. It was a non-title fight, though. He did end up winning. But before the end of the year, a purse bid was held for Kakachi to make his mandatory defense against number one contender Eduardo Nunez. That fight seems to be close to being finalized. We haven't heard anything concrete on it, but it looks like it's close to being finalized, and like Kakachi will be fighting Nunez next. If he doesn't, Nunez will probably fight number 3 challenger Masanori Rikishi, who's the number 3 contender in the IBF. Hopefully this fight is finalized, or we have a clearer picture by the first Champions Report of 2025 at the end of February. We'll keep you posted. And hopefully whoever the IBF champion is will attempt to unify belts in 2025. Next up is lightweight, 135 pounds. The title was vacant coming into the year because Devin Haney in 23 had vacated his undisputed title to move up to 140 officially. So the IBF ordered its top 2 challengers, which were former world champions Vasily Lomachenko and George Kambosos Jr. to collide. In May, in Australia, Lomachenko would travel to Kambosos' backyard and completely dominate George Kambosos Jr. Picked him apart, dominated him, scored an impressive 11th round TKO victory, handing Kambosos his first knockout loss of his career. After that, the next couple months, Lomachenko was in negotiations with Gervonta Tank Davis to try to unify belts. But in July, he would pull out of negotiations, citing that he wanted to take the rest of the year off to spend time with his family. He's also been a big part of the war effort with the Ukraine and Russia. Right now, we know that he's contemplating retirement. We know he's got a couple injuries. His manager said that if his back is okay after tests, that he's probably going to fight. But he said he's not going to make any decision until after the first of the year. So with all that being said, I really do believe by the first Champions Report, we are going to know exactly whether Lomachenko is going to be fighting again, if it's going to be against his highest rated challenger, which is Zaur Abdullayev, or if he's going to be fighting somebody else in an optional effort. It just really depends. I could see him fighting Abdullayev next, and if he vacates the belt, it looks like the highest rated challengers would be Zaur Abdullayev and Raymond Murataya, which would be big. So we'll see what happens, but I also hope that whoever becomes IBF champ is interested in unifying belts in 2025. Next at 140, junior welterweight, Subriel Matias entered the year as the newly crowned champ, a belt he had claimed in 2023 impressively, and he was really the most feared guy in the division heading into 2024. In his first defense of the year in June, he would take on Australian Liam Paro. He'd be in his backyard of Puerto Rico, and he would get outboxed in this fight. He fought hard, but as the fight progressed and Paro used his footwork and his southpaw boxing ability, he was able to pick off Subriel Matias and would score an upset 12-round decision to become the new IBF champion in a big time upset. Then Paro was forced to make his IBF mandatory defense. He went back to Puerto Rico, and in December, he would take on undefeated Richardson Hitchens. Richardson Hitchens would outbox Paro and score a 12-round unanimous decision to become the new IBF champion and closes out the year at that. So Hitchens was the mandatory. So heading into 2025, we do not know who Hitchens is going to fight next, but he is in optional mode. I'm hoping he wants to unify, but it doesn't look like unification is possible in the first half of the year. But I really hope he gets a good, solid opponent in the first half. He's a DAZN guy. I really think Eddie Hearn is going to hook him up with a good, solid opponent next, whether it be the winner of Jack Catterall and Arnold Barbosa or somebody else, but we'll see what happens. But Richardson Hitchens is your IBF champ coming into the year. Hopefully by the first Champions Report of 2025, we know what Hitchens is planning on doing next. Next at 147 welterweight, Jerome Boots Ennis entered the year as the undefeated champion, but he had not defended his title yet. Finally, in I believe it was July, he would his opponent had to pull out of the fight. Cody Crowley, his mandatory challenger, and he would end up fighting David Avanesian, the veteran former world title challenger, because nobody else wanted to fight him. Boots went in there and dominated Avanesian, scoring a fifth round TKO to retain his belt. He would return in November and would take on his mandatory challenger, Karan Chukashian, in a rematch from their January 2023 bout. Again, he would just outwork Kukajian and get a 12-round unanimous decision and retain his belt. There's been multiple talks. There was talks about Boots moving up to 154 and giving up the belt. But Boots really wants to unify titles at 147. So he's really pushing for that. And I think by the first champions report of 2025, we're going to know who he's going to fight next, but I'm not sure it's going to be one of the other champions because Stanionis seems to be in mandatory mode. Barrios is considering his next opponent. There has been talks that it could be Barrios, and then Brian Norman Jr. is also going to make an optional defense next. So we'll see, but I'm hoping Boots does something big. We know Jin Sasaki is fighting at the beginning in January, and he is the highest rated challenger in the IBF right now. So we'll see what goes down in 2025 for the IBF title in Boots Ennis. Next at 154, super welterweight. The title was vacant coming into the year, as Charlo had vacated the world title. Then the vacant title would go on the line in April when Bakram Murtazalayev, who is the longtime undefeated mandatory challenger, would take on veteran Jack Kulke. They went at it toe-to-toe. It was a good, hard-fought battle, but Murtazalayev would break down Kulke, stopping him in the late rounds, and became the new IBF world champion. But that kind of flew under the radar, was very quiet. In October, Bakram would make a mandatory defense of his title against Tim Tszyu after Erickson Lubin had pulled out of a I think Lubin pulled out of a defense. Anyways, he would take on Tim Tszyu. Tim Tszyu came in highly regarded and a big-time favorite to take the title from Murtazalayev. And in a shocking upset, Bakram dominated and destroyed Tim Tszyu, stopping him in only 3 rounds as he retained the IBF championship. We know that he is in optional mode right now. He does not have a mandatory challenger. We're waiting around to see who that might be. We haven't heard anything about unification. But we know Erickson Lubin is the highest rated challenger, and he's a fellow PBC guy. So I think that could be the direction that Murtazalayev goes in, but we'll see what the PBC decides for him. But by the first champions report of 2025, I do believe we're going to know who Bakram could be fighting next, and hopefully that fight is signed and ready to go. And hopefully we see Bakram attempting to unify titles against one of the other champs, because 154 is loaded, and it's a great division. Next up at 160 middleweight, Janibek Alamanhalai entered the year as the new IBF and unified middleweight world champion. He had unified the titles when he defeated Vicente Gualtieri in October of 2023, stopping him in 6 rounds. He went to make a mandatory defense of his title against Andrei Mikhailovich in July, but dehydration forced him out of the fight I think the week of the fight, so it got postponed. Finally, in October, he would make his IBF mandatory defense, but the WBO title was not on the line. But he would still break down, dominate, and stop Mikhailovich to retain his IBF belt. Before the end of the year, the WBO ordered Janibek to fight his mandatory challenger and undefeated Hamza Shiraz, but Hamza Shiraz would pull out of negotiations and push for a WBC title fight, as he was a mandatory over there as well. And now Janibek doesn't have a fight signed and good to go to start 2025. There is a lot of talks that the WBO is going to order him to fight his number 1 contender, Denzel Bentley, in a rematch from a fight a couple years ago when Janibek won that fight convincingly by a decision, but we don't know for sure yet. So hopefully we know by the first champions report of 2025 what Janibek is going to do with both the IBF and WBO belts. Next, at 168 super middleweight, Canelo Alvarez entered the year as the reigning IBF and undisputed super middleweight world champion. In May, he would put all 4 titles on the line against former junior middleweight champ and undefeated Jaime Munguia. He would dominate Munguia, scoring a 3rd round knockdown, and then bust him up the remainder of the 12 rounds to a one-sided 12-round unanimous decision. But after pressure from the IBF to make a mandatory defense against William Skull, Canelo decided to vacate his title and put it up for grabs in, I believe it was October. Yeah, it was late October. William Skull battled Vladimir Shishkin for the vacant world title over in Germany, and Skull got out of there with a close, controversial decision win to become the new IBF world champion. Entering 2025, we've heard that Canelo is not interested in becoming undisputed again and fighting William Skull because William Skull did not look good against Shishkin. We know the IBF has ordered Christian Mobility to fight Diego Pacheco, but Pacheco is the number one contender in the WBO. So right now, the last thing I heard was that Mobility is going to fight number 6 contender Kevin Lele's Sajo next to become mandatory at the title. But we also know that Vladimir Shishkin is still ranked number 2. What I believe is going on is the IBF is waiting around to see if Canelo is interested in fighting Skull in his next fight to become undisputed again. And then once Canelo makes his decision about fighting him or not fighting him, they will order William Skull to fight Shishkin if Canelo decides to not fight William Skull for undisputed. So, and then again, Mobility will fight Sajo to become mandatory challenger. Hopefully by the first Champions Report of 2025, we have a more clear path of what's going to go on for the IBF world title. But I really hope undisputed happens again, whether it be Canelo or somebody else, for the IBF title, because William Skull is just not that well known of a fighter. Anyways, moving on to 175 light heavyweight. Arthur Beterbiev entered the year as the reigning IBF and unified light heavyweight world champion. In January, he would make a mandatory defense when he took on his WBC mandatory challenger, former super middleweight champion Callum Smith. He would dominate and destroy Callum Smith with a 7th round TKO win to hold on to all 3 of his world titles. He was supposed to fight June 1st and unify all 4 belts against Dimitri Bivol, but he had to pull out with an injury. In October, that fight finally happened for undisputed, and Arthur Beterbiev would defeat Dimitri Bivol in a mega fight to become the undisputed light heavyweight world champion and unify all 4 world titles. He almost was stripped of the IBF title, though, following this victory, because he was ordered by the IBF to fight mandatory challenger Michael Eifert, who in all fairness has been waiting around over a year and a half for his shot at the title. But Turki Al-Sheikh was able to work with the IBF, and entering 2025, Arthur Beterbiev is set to defend the IBF and undisputed light heavyweight championship of the world against Dimitri Bivol in a much anticipated rematch, as their first fight ended by a majority decision. So these two will lock horns Saturday, February 22nd, as part of Riyadh season. In main event, the best fight card I've ever seen put together, period. Should be a great rematch. Looking forward to it. By the first Champions Report of 2025, we will know if Beterbiev is still champ and what his future plans are, or if Dimitri Bivol is the new champ and what his future plans are. So we'll see. Next at cruiserweight, entering the year 200 pounds, entering the year as champion was the IBF title was actually vacant, as the IBF had stripped Jai Opetaia for fighting on the Day of Reckoning card against Elizoro last year. But the IBF would rectify this. In May, the vacant title would go on the line when Jai Opetaia would battle former 3-time world champion Maris Bradis in a rematch from their 2022 bout, in which Opetaia took a convincing unanimous decision. The second fight was similar to the first fight, though. Jai Opetaia dominated early on and into the second half of the fight, and then Maris Bradis closed the fight strong. He hurt Jai, but Jai was able to weather the storm and score a convincing 12-round unanimous decision to retain his IBF title. After that, he would return in October to take on Englishman Jack Massey and would dominate him, scoring a 6th-round TKO victory to retain his belt. Since then, he's been wanting to unify belts against Gilberto Ramirez, who's the new unified champion. But before he can do that, he was supposed to make a mandatory defense of his title January 8th against his number 1 contender, Hussein Sin Cara. But Sin Cara had to pull out of the fight with an injury. So Jai Opetaia instead is going to fight number 10 IBF contender David Nakia, who's an undefeated fighter but a big time underdog. If Jai gets through that fight, it looks like unification could be on the table potentially later in the year, but he's got to get through this first title defense, and I believe he will. But we will know more information, hopefully, by the first champions report at the end of 2025 about the IBF cruiserweight title. And finally, the heavyweight championship. Alexander Usyk entered the year as the IBF and unified heavyweight champ. In May, he would battle Tyson Fury to determine the first undisputed heavyweight champion of the four-belt era. All titles would be on the line, and Alexander Usyk would score an upset 12-round split decision victory over Fury in a great fight where he scored a knockdown in the 9th round on Fury. He would retain the IBF and become the undisputed champ. But under a lot of pressure from the IBF to make a mandatory defense, he finally decided, I think it was in July or August, to vacate the IBF title because he didn't want to deal with their bullshit ahead of a potential rematch with Fury in December. So interim champion Daniel Dubois was upgraded to full champion at that point. Dubois had upset Filip Hrgović to become the IBF interim heavyweight champ, so he was upgraded to full champion. And then in September, Dubois would put the title on the line against mandatory challenger, former two-time champ Anthony Joshua, in an all-UK battle and an all-UK pay-per-view as part of Riyadh season that took place in September. And Dubois would kick the shit out of Anthony Joshua with a 5th-round knockout victory to retain the title. A lot of people think he won the belt from Joshua. No, he kept the belt when he knocked Joshua out in the 5th round of that fight, scoring the biggest win of his career. He did not fight the remainder of the year, but he has his first fight set for 2025, a huge title defense when he battles current WBO interim champion, former WBO heavyweight champ Joseph Parker. Big time showdown that takes place February 22nd, actually as the co-feature to Better Be of Bivol 2, as they will battle for the IBF heavyweight title. The winner could likely be facing off against Usyk for the undisputed title later in the year. But a big time fight right here. Can't wait to see it between Dubois and Parker. It's going to be good. February 22nd as part of Riyadh season and DAZN on pay-per-view. So that's it, guys. That is the IBF Champions Report. This was the 2024 year in review. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, smash the like button, leave a comment, or subscribe to the channel. I appreciate any and all support. This is True Boxing. You've been hit with the truth.